By sunset, I'll be the new emperor. Stella.
Simon.
Stella.
Simon.
An unknown planet named Uranus.
Well, shall we begin our search?
The Sador of the Malmori, I command you to surrender.
My job is to find mercenaries.
I have heard of your battle with the Malmori. I wish to join you.
There are hundreds of thousands like us at home and scattered throughout the universe. We are history.
Not a trace of them left. Not even their dust.
Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi, with me, James.
And me, Matt. Every series on this podcast, we explore the world of science fiction cinema by taking a trip through a different subgenre of sci-fi.
This series, our journey is through the fantastical world of space opera.
Welcome back, listeners. Last time on the show, we were talking about the original trilogy, George Lucas's masterpiece, of course, the first 3 Star Wars movies. This time on the show, we are talking about the films that came in the wake of Star Wars. So after pop culture was forever changed by George Lucas's trilogy, what did space opera do in the wake of that, and how did it influence the films coming out in the handful of years immediately after 1977? So what are the films, James, that we've got lined up to talk about that?
So this time on the show, we're going to be looking at a couple of what many have referred to as Star Wars clones. We've got Starcrash from 1978, directed by Luigi Cozzi, and Battle Beyond the Stars from 1980, directed by Jimmy T. Murakami and Roger Corman.
Yes, 2 big, colourful, action-packed space operas very much in the vein of Star Wars. As James said, Star Wars clones, the kind of space detritus floating behind Star Wars in its wake in the late 70s, early 1980s. So I think fair to say these aren't great films, and these aren't films on a level with Star Wars, but they're very interesting. It's interesting to see that immediate influence that it had on science fiction, science fantasy, and space opera, and what was coming out in American cinemas at the time. Some of it imported over from Italy in the case of Starcrash.
Yeah, it was really fascinating around that time, just seeing how all of these companies and these filmmakers were trying to cash in on the big Star Wars popularity. It just absolutely blew up, like we said in the last episode when we were talking about Star Wars specifically. And afterwards, there was just this array of different films coming out, all with a Star Wars tinge to them. That tinge is probably a bit more than a tinge in these 2 cases, to say the least, but we'll get into that as we discuss them throughout the episode.
To get us started then, we are starting with 1978's Starcrash, directed by Luigi Cozzi, 1 year after the release of Star Wars.
Our galaxy is split into 2 warring factions, our own and the one ruled by the evil Count Zarthan from the League of the Dark Worlds. The Count has created a weapon so vast, so huge, that it would take a whole planet to conceal it. You must sail to the haunted stars. Find the Count's secret planet and destroy it.
This is one which I had not encountered before until we were doing the prep for this series. It's very grindhouse, this film, isn't it? It's quite schlocky. It's a typical kind of B movie, but it's one which has now become quite infamous because it's got a cult following, as so many of these great B movies do. And it's an interesting case because, like you said earlier, it was done by an Italian production company. The director is Italian, and it's kind of a mishmash of a few different kind of like sci-fi and fantasy films. And it's this really bonkers combination of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it wears its influences on its sleeve, I think would be a generous description of it. Everyone's speaking English, but everyone also appears to be dubbed. So I'm assuming that quite a few of the actors are Italian or European and have strong accents that didn't make it into the American release of the film. And it feels quite European. You said it feels like very grindhousey. It feels like a European movie from the late 70s that's ripping off Star Wars, basically.
Well, surprisingly enough, a lot of the cast are actually American or English.
Oh, are they?
I think quite a few of them are. For whatever reason, they had to dub over them, because I know Caroline Munro, she's a British actress. She was in The Spy Who Loved Me. She was in the Sinbad film, which we'll talk about more later on in the episode. But they dubbed over her, and I think I read somewhere that it was because they couldn't afford to get her over to America to redo her parts, so they just got an American actress in to come and do her bits.
Why would she need to redo her parts?
I have no idea, but again, it probably speaks to the production of this film. I couldn't find anything online about that specifically, but I'm sure there is loads of stuff somewhere that I just didn't come across during the prep. But it's interesting that this is another film which we've encountered where they've had to dub over British actors, because we found it in Kroll as well, didn't we?
Yeah, just villains at this time in cinema. That's the English accent, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, Caroline Munro did play a villain in The Spy Who Loved Me, so...
Is she? Okay.
Yeah, but she was dubbed by American actress Candy Clark, who was also in American Graffiti.
Candy Clark. Now, that does not sound like a real name, does it?
It's almost as crazy as Stella Star.
Yeah. So Stella Star is Caroline Munro's character, the main hero of the piece, the kind of space bikini-clad Luke Skywalker. Luke, halfway between Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, isn't she?
Yeah, she's a smuggler, isn't she? So she's kind of like a bit of a badass at the same time. She's more badass than Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly.
She's not a farm boy.
Yeah, I mean, she's accompanied by, rather than a Wookiee, but a bit of a farm boy. Her navigator sidekick, is it Acton or Archon? I think it's Acton, isn't it?
Yeah, Acton.
He's got a bit of the Luke Skywalker to him, hasn't he? He's a bit naive, farm boyish, and a bit magical. He's
a really strange character as well, because originally he was supposed to be a full-on alien character in the original ideas for the film, but basically the actor didn't want to wear this crazy wig, which he said made him look ridiculous. So they got rid of that. So Marjo Gortner didn't end up wearing any of the alien prosthetics, whatever they might have had in mind, and he ended up just looking like himself. And then, he gets these weird powers throughout the film, which don't really get explained. But again, it's just part of the wacky nature of this film. And one of my favourite things about this film as well is Luigi Cozzi went on record before this film, when this film came out, claiming that this was not a Star Wars ripoff, and he had the idea before Star Wars, and he was very adamant about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would also go on record and say that this film had nothing to do with Star Wars if I had been the director in 1978, and that's fine. And you can say that, and that's fine. I don't think you're going to be winning over many hearts and minds with that claim if they've seen Star Wars and then watched this. But that's fine. We'll let him say that. You are absolutely entitled to make your claims, Mr. Cozzi.
Exactly. And it does have a few things that Star Wars hadn't had at this time. It's got the first ever green lightsaber, which we see in this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the first green one, but it's not the first lightsaber, to say
So it has
the least.
the revolutionary original idea of a green lightsaber.
Yeah, which we don't see until Return of the Jedi some years later. But Luigi got there first with his green lightsaber. But he doesn't. I can't even. It's like a laser sword, basically. That's what a lightsaber is. But I can't remember what they refer to them as in this film.
As with many things in this film, I think it is just not referred to at all. It just happens.
So this film, we've already implied that it's a bit of a mad one. What is the plot? Can you decipher the plot of this film, Matt, for our listeners?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there's a way of explaining the plot where the plot is exactly the same as Star Wars, right? You've got a talented pilot who is recruited by an organization to fight an larger evil organization and also rescue a member of royalty along the way and then team up with them to take down the evil organization. In fairness, if you go into any more detail than that, the plot does stray away from Star Wars, but those bare bones are Star Wars, and the lead character has robot mates that help them along the way, and there's a laser sword and mysterious powers. But yeah, I mean, it does diverge from Star Wars. I have to say, the opening shot, I was a bit like, oh dear, because the opening shot is identical to the first Star Wars movie. It's field of stars onto which a cruiser flies in. I mean, what am I doing describing? Everyone knows the opening shot of Star Wars, but it's exactly that. I'd say the biggest problem with that, apart from ripping off the opening shot with Star Wars, is that it immediately invites comparisons to Star Wars. In particular, the design of the spaceships in this film is pretty naff. They look like sort of plasticky toys.
Yeah.
And we just rewatched Star Wars and how amazing all of the ships and miniatures look in that. You just from the get-go, you're like, well, this looks like a shittier Star Wars.
It's not got the best special effects in this in terms of when you do those comparisons to Star Wars, you can't get away from the comparisons, but instantly it makes this one look more schlocky than anything else, because like you said, they look cheap, the models, but I suppose at the time they're still figuring out how to do that. These guys aren't Industrial Light and Magic. They're not to that level of figuring out this camera stuff. And we already talked about how long it took them to get everything right, to get those kind of effects in Star Wars. So
yes,
here are these people trying to cash in on the space opera boom, and they're doing these effects without really knowing how to do them. So you've got just basically a camera in front of a model, and there's no sort of kinetic nature to the shots, really. They're just the same kind of framing as you've got in Star Wars, but you haven't got that quick editing and quick sort of action that we see so much in Star Wars, which we talked about previously, which is what makes it so exciting. So it takes away the excitement by just having static shots of a quite crudely made model when you've got it compared to all the Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, and I suppose what I find strange is that they, in deliberately copying that shot from Star Wars, it does invite those comparisons. And when you're working on a lower budget without the wonderful special effects of Industrial Light and Magic, maybe you would not want to deliberately invite comparisons. And it's fine to, be influenced by and to an extent rip off, a hugely successful film in your film, but why recreate an opening shot to sort of stick in someone's mind and then invite comparisons to a far superior film? Seems like a very strange decision for me, that one. Just the very opening, anyway.
And in talking about that opening as well, the way that they show the stars in this universe is interesting because it's very much more a product of the 70s, it feels like, because it's very disco lights. Which we talked about before, and how Star Wars kind of went away from that because it was using a score which was really full of orchestral music and harking back to Flash Gordon and stuff of that period, whereas this seems like it's still rooted in that 70s disco fever. Yeah,
now for me, to be fair, that's where the film sort of comes into its own. It certainly looks pretty cheesy and very dated, but there is a certain fun to be had with that. The ridiculously colourful disco starscape that kind of populates everything, I quite liked because it is different from Star Wars, and it kind of gives this film its own cheesy grindhouse European flavour, which is something to like grab a hold of and be like, okay, this is what I'm watching now. I'm not just watching pure like an attempt to make Star Wars for less money, but it's got its own kind of attitude to it.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes through in Caroline Munro's character specifically. Like you said, the leather bikini that she's wearing throughout the first half of the film, which slowly fades into different kind of wardrobe changes, mainly because the production company was worried that if she was wearing that bikini for the entire film, they wouldn't be able to broadcast it on national television. So they made her wear more and more clothes as it went on, thinking about it. But that kind of, it's really embracing that 70s vibe more, which makes it less timeless. But like you said, it's a product of the 70s. And all of the stuff that went into making this film is quite interesting as well, because it was helped out by a guy called Roger Corman, which I think we may have talked about Roger Corman a few times on the show. What do you know about Roger Corman?
I know that he's very well respected and loved, but I don't necessarily know why. Like the only films that I'm aware of Roger Corman are like really cheesy B movies, but I know that he was very influential. I think like he kind of kick-started the movement of filmmakers that we were talking about last week that is made up of Coppola, Lucas, Spielberg, Scorsese, etc. I think he helped a few of them out just in terms of actually giving them work, and you know, he's a guy that just is incredibly prolific in producing, directing and distributing, isn't he? He's just kind of everywhere in the 60s, 70s, 80s independent scene in Hollywood. But actual films that I associate with Corman, like nothing good, to be honest. Like, I can't think of like a good Corman film, but maybe I just haven't seen enough of his work.
Yeah, you're 100% right, though. It's just this, he's kind of the man behind the scenes for all of these directors, giving them their big chances and mentoring them in the world of film. Like you said, Coppola, Ron Howard, Scorsese, Joe Dante, James Cameron, who we'll talk about when we talk about Battle Beyond the Stars. All of these prolific directors, which we now know and love, they all started working with Roger Corman. And also Roger Corman was, like I said, the distribution that he was doing. He co-founded New World Pictures, which was a distribution company which put out films in the US, films by Ingmar Bergman, Francois Truffaut, Akira Kurosawa. He's putting those films out there for US audiences. So again, it's that real kind of appreciation of film, even though he's done a lot of schlocky, Hammer horror-esque kind of stuff, and he may not be known for those for really big films, but I think it's all of that stuff behind the scenes. And with this film specifically, with Starcrash had a lot of production issues, as you can imagine. And at one point, it almost never came out because the production company which were going to put it out, or the distributors, they backed out and they finished making the film. They took a look at it and were like, actually, no, we're not really sold on this. We're not going to put it out. So it almost didn't get released. And then Roger Corman stepped in, was like, this is a bit of fun. I'll distribute it through New World Pictures. So it was basically saved by Roger Corman. And I just love that. He's just seen this schlocky space opera and was like, okay, sure, let's give it a shot. Let's do it.
Fair play to him, yeah. And some of the names you listed there, some of the bigger names you listed that he's bringing to the US. That's amazing work and very influential. And he also sounds like he might be quite a fun guy if he's just stepping in to save weird little rip-offs like this and get them an audience.
But then there could be like a cash element to it as well. Right. Thinking of like the space opera boom and what you might get out of putting out a space opera at that time. But who knows? We weren't there, but from what I can see, Roger Corman was like he's essential to cinema and how it went on afterwards and all the developments that happened. But talking about Starcrash then, so it is a space opera, and we've talked about the comparisons to Star Wars. It also felt to me a bit like, well, it felt very episodic, like we've seen throughout so far the series, but more episodic than perhaps some of the other space operas we've looked at. It looked like little episodes in different planets throughout, didn't it?
Yeah, we talked about this in Star Wars, but I think what we're talking about in Star Wars was how the various different locations across 3 films are knitted together by ILM's special effects, so everything feels like a consistent universe, even though each film has a distinctive kind of location temperature that's key to the film. Whereas in Starcrash, it is episodic, and we go. The main thrust of the plot is that Stellar Star and her crew are searching through escape pods and trying to find this one crashed ship, which will have the Emperor's son, Prince Simon, aboard it.
Prince Simon as well.
Prince Simon, yeah.
Prince Si, where's Prince Si? We're going to go find him in space.
And each of these escape pods have landed on a different planet, and each of these planets has its own distinct character. And there's a few other locations as well, like a prison ship before that, and then climaxing in a big space battle. So we have these different on-screen locations to move throughout the film. Very reminiscent of Star Wars, Flash Gordon. We talked about that in Barbarella as well.
Yeah, Barbarella's a good comparison, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the casting of Caroline Munro and the wardrobe of Caroline Munro, as you were talking about, there's a bit of a Barbarella feel, but with none of the charm. I was kind of trying to argue a case for Barbarella being quite charming when we talked about that, and it feels a bit more like they just... I mean, you were saying they covered her up because they were worried about putting it on TV, but they don't seem too worried about that through most of the film. Yeah.
I was a bit taken aback by that when it first started. I was like, I wasn't expecting that from this film, because she is barely wearing anything throughout the first half, at least.
Yeah, so I don't think they were too worried about.
But hey, it's
TV
Italian.
Yeah.
Put her into the mind probe.
No! No!
Hold it right there!
Elle!
Release her or I'll blast your queen. I mean it. Come on now. Don't you people move or you're dead. You mean to treble, and I'm gonna clean out your sinuses real good, lady. Now you stand there. Okay, close the door. Don't you follow us now.
Stop them! Stop them!
Yeah, and talking about the planets as well, like the different temperatures, they do the sort of temperature thing, don't they? They've got a desert planet with Amazonians on, and then they've got a snow planet where it's basically like Hoth, which is yet to come out at this point. And they do that kind of like, right, we're going to this place and we're seeing these people and we're going to see what's there. The crew that they've got is quite funny as well. They've got a robot who's got a really big southern drawl. Yeah,
that's the least of the problems with that robot. There's a very weird setup and premise in Starcrash. And I don't just mean because of the comparisons to Star Wars, but we have a Han Solo type character on the run from the law, being pursued by an empire who are very authoritarian and sort of strict, and chasing them through the galaxy. So from the get-go, even if Star Wars didn't exist, I think that you would assume that the Empire characters and the stern robot sheriff with the southern drawl are the bad guys, right? We know who our good guys feel like, and we know what feels like the bad guys in this film. And that's not the case. They all they imprison her, but then like make friends within about half an hour at the start of the film. And that's all flipped on its head. And now there's another bad guy, the evil Count, the League of Super Villains, or whatever it's called, that the Count belongs to. Stellar Star is released and forced or just asked, charged with a mission to go after them instead of being a smuggler, basically.
Yeah, because she gets sent to prison, doesn't she, straight off the bat, and then gets out of prison really quickly just because like, oh, actually, can you just go and do this? And the plot is very free and easy with this film, and it's just kind of it's just kind of going at a pace, trying to. I've got to be honest, it took me a long time. I could barely follow it for a lot of it. I didn't really know what was going on, but I was having fun with the different sort of set pieces and what was happening. And of course the special effects as well, which other than the model spaceships, they've got this very Ray Harryhausen inspired stop motion animation that's happening with all of the big monsters that you see and the big robots. What did you think of that side of the special effects?
Yeah, don't mind that at all. I mean, the big robot doesn't look very good. It looks like a particularly cheap toy that you would have when you're a kid. Like, I mean, appropriately, it looks like the toy you would get that is like a rip-off of a bigger brand of toy, you know? Like your parents didn't get you the Transformer you wanted, but you got a Transmorpher. This is what it would look like. But I didn't mind the special effects. I love a bit of stop-motion Ray Harryhausen. It doesn't have the level of detail, I think, that you would expect from Harryhausen's work. But it's certainly inspired by that. And again, it's something a bit different from the typical puppetry of Star Wars. So again, it gives it its own slightly shoddy, slightly dated, but at least distinct and unique sense of character for this film. Yeah,
because it's interesting that the animation feels outdated in this film in particular. I don't know what it is. I think there's something about, maybe it's something about the setting of Ray Harryhausen films. And obviously the stop animation is much more sophisticated in those and the models are much more detailed. But all of those films, well, the ones that I think about when I think about Ray Harryhausen are things like Jason and the Argonauts and Sinbad and all of that kind of stuff. And with those films, because they are set in times past and they're not in this futuristic world, I don't know, something about that meshes more for me. I don't know what it is.
I get what you mean. Are you looking for something a bit more sleek and futuristic in your space
I think maybe
fantasy?
I've just been brainwashed by Star Wars special effects, and for me, I associate that with that. And then it is interesting seeing how Cozzi's used them, and he has been quoted as saying that he wanted to do Sinbad in space. And that's what this film kind of becomes in that way with all the special effects. And Cozzi actually does go on to do a Sinbad film with Lou Ferrigno, and that's kind of him being like, right, I love Sinbad so much, I'm actually going to just do a Sinbad film. So I found those comparisons quite interesting when watching this. And obviously Caroline Munro had been in Sinbad previously, so Cozzi's a bit obsessed.
Yeah, fair enough. I quite like it when it's always interesting when directors do that kind of thing where it's like, I only made this film to sort of prove I can make a different kind of film. See J.J. Abrams with Star Trek and then having no real interest in the Star Trek universe and just wanting to work on Star Wars.
But then we've got a supporting cast in this as well, which is quite interesting. We talked about the crazy characters, but they've also got Christopher Plummer in here as the Emperor, who's giving like really weird monologues.
Yes.
And his outro monologue is so sort of deep and just off kilter. That took me aback as well.
Yeah, he's a pretty weird character who is surprisingly central to the film. Like he appears at the start to sort of give our heroes their mission and purpose, but then he's just always around. Like you kind of feel like that sort of character can then be sidelined so we can just watch the heroes go on their adventure, but he kind of keeps popping back up. He's instrumental in actually he's leading his army, which is fair enough, it makes sense, but it's just unusual to have that character just lurking on the periphery, on the edges of the film the whole time, when you kind of expect him to just sit back once he's said his bit. And he is always popping up and giving weird, quite awkward monologues that, like, when he's talking, you just sort of feel like all the other characters are just like, oh, this guy's banging on again, like, you know, like waiting for it to end, like you would if you kind of had an awkward relative at a family dinner, you know, that's just going on like a bit of a rant.
Yeah, and you can see why they've got Christopher Plummer in there. They kind of want like an Alec Guinness kind of figure to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi in the film. But they've done this weird thing where he's because he's the Emperor, he doesn't really fulfill that mentor role that Obi-Wan Kenobi does in Star Wars. It's kind of, it's a thing in fantasy films and like folk tales and mythology where you've got this older mentor character guiding the heroes and teaching them about something. Whereas in this, you've just got the Emperor who is giving out monologues, and Christopher Plummer clearly just wants to be in Italy shooting the film. He doesn't really care about what the actual film's about. At least that's what it seems like. And he's just kind of, it feels like they've kind of wasted him and wasted that character in the film. But then again, this film is kind of like, it's what it is. It's not trying to be anything more. It's a mishmash of loads of stuff, and it just doesn't quite translate for that character in particular.
Yeah, it's kind of the film is a bit of a scattergun, isn't it?
That's a great way of saying it.
Yeah,
a scattergun.
And Christopher Plummer is just one little dot shot out of that gun hitting the screen, and yeah, he's not the character just isn't that well crafted, but he is kind of he's the alternative to Joe Spinell's evil Count Zarth, who I thought was great fun, really good bad guy, really camp, over the top. He's having the time of his life playing this character. It's a simple archetype character, isn't it? It's very Emperor Ming kind of thing. You just kind of pluck that out and basically do the exact same thing that's been done 100 times on film. But if you can get a guy who, like Joe Spinell, who's in there having a good old time with it, it can actually be really effective, and it just adds a lot of fun to the film. He's no Darth Vader, but he's a more fun bad guy than Darth Vader, isn't he?
Yeah, Zarth rather than Darth, which is a little bit on the nose. But yeah, there is something about, you've got to have a really maniacal bad guy in these films in order to make them work. And Joe Spinell does a good job of that and adds something to it, and he's just having fun and makes it like camp and all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got the Hoff making an appearance in this film as well as the before-mentioned Prince Simon.
Yeah, did you find yourself just waiting for him to show up because he's in the opening credits, his name? I was like, David Hasselhoff? Okay,
I was like, where's he going to be? When's he going to pop up?
I mean, I was questioning myself, thinking that Acton might have been David Hasselhoff. I was like, is this film like so early in his career that I don't recognise David Hasselhoff? And that's just what he looks like? Because you're just waiting for him to show up. He doesn't show up till well past halfway through the movie when they finally find Prince Simon with his laser beam helmet eyes.
Laser beam helmet eyes, yeah. It's good. And because it is the Hoff, and it's the big reveal when he takes his helmet off, that it is the Hoff. It's David Hasselhoff. And like you say, it's because he's got a perm as well as the other character.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. I was just a bit like, maybe that's what David Hasselhoff looked like in the late 70s. I don't know.
Absolutely doubting yourself about it.
Yeah, because as far as I could tell, he wasn't in the movie.
Yeah, I kept thinking exactly the same thing as you. I thought he was the guy playing Acton, but Acton's powers just really threw me off, and then he just whips out his lightsaber out of nowhere and starts fighting these robots, and he comes back from the dead for no apparent reason. He's
comes
just
back from
like
the dead, reveals that he has the power of prescience. He can see the future, but he won't do anything about it.
No, he just likes to do it. He's just like, it's just a bonus power that I have. And then you've got there's so many mad characters in this. Like even the weird guy who is working with the police, Chief 4, who's got green skin, but his makeup isn't properly covering his neck. So he's just kind of half green.
Yeah.
And I think that the guy who plays him, Robert Tessier, was a stuntman who occasionally did acting work. So it feels like they just got him on board. Hey, this guy can dress up in green and we'll just have him in the background. And yeah, but again, it's schlocky and it's grindhousey, but it's fun. They're having fun with it. But I do think it was a bit of a struggle for me watching this film, just because it's hard to keep up with what's going on. My mind drifted. but I can see why it became a cult favourite.
I mean, I have to say, I think that the film really picks up in the final act because it turns into just a big space battle. And I thought, you know, even though I was a bit like, the ships looked a bit naff at the start of the film, I did kind of think, like, when it's just an all-out space fight, I was quite enjoying it. I just thought, hey, this is great. You can't really go wrong with this. You're absolutely correct. It doesn't have that kinetic kind of well-directed dogfights in space that Star Wars had. That, you know, they really worked through and put a lot of clever thinking into to develop. It doesn't have that, but hey, it's all right. It's good fun. A little bit confusing when the word Starcrash is finally said on screen as the kind of ultimate weapon at the end of this fight, which I found myself rewinding that scene just to like listen to the description of it's a fourth dimensional attack where they drop in from hyperspace fourth dimensionally, but really all they're doing is just crashing one extremely large object into another extremely large object. That's Starcrash, isn't it?
I think so. I think you've got more of a handle on it than I ever did.
Oh, I kept watching the scene because I was like, what is he talking about? Fourth dimensional? What are you talking about?
It's a star crash. It's a big crash.
Yeah. They fly a city into a ship or a ship into a city. And that Star Crash, and it feels like a big reveal because it's like, hey, that's the name of the film. This must be a big deal, but it's not. It's just kind of like the climax of the space fight. But I was kind of enjoying most of that until I got confused by Starcraft.
But you're right. That Star Crash, that fight at the end. There's like 100 different lasers going off.
Yeah,
just this like full on. Just it felt like you'd have an epileptic fit if you were watching that because it was just everywhere, just lasers flying all over the place. We're just going to give you 100 lasers and you're going to enjoy it. Yeah, I can see why all of those things contribute to it sort of like getting that cult status. And it became a bit of a myth for people around the time sort of videos were coming out and VHSs because it wasn't released for years and years. You couldn't get it from like a local video rental store or anything like that. It just wasn't available. And people would talk about this film Starcrash with the Hoth as a prince and rip off lightsabers and Southern drawl robots and all of this stuff. And it just like people would just be like, that surely never existed. But later on it came out and then the secrets were revealed to the world.
Yeah, I can see this playing at like the Prince Charles Cinema or something like that maybe.
Yeah. You need like a classic independent cinema to show it where people can make lots of noise and just get drunk whilst watching this crazy Star Crash of a film.
So this came immediately off the back of Star Wars in 1978 and I think it feels like it was rushed into existence to copy Star Wars, and I respect Luigi Cozzi's right to say that it was all complete independent thinking done before Star Wars. That's fine, but doesn't appear to be the case to me. Shall we move on to our next film, which comes out 2 years later and has maybe had a little bit more time to stew, to bubble away creatively, and to copy Star Wars in a slightly better way, I think.
Yes, let's move on to Battle Beyond the Stars. Hi, listeners. If you're enjoying the show and want to support what we do, you can sign up to our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi.
And if you subscribe at the warp speed level, you'll get access to our regular bonus episodes, as well as the whole back catalogue.
We've got a host of mini-series like deep dives into the Terminator and Planet of the Apes franchises, as well as the Bad Movie Bunker and reviews of the latest sci-fi films.
Plus, you'll get a say in the kind of content we make for our patrons.
We hope to see you there.
Ruthless invaders, a defenseless planet. Battle beyond the stars. The story of a boy who finds more than he expected. And all he can handle.
Does your species have kissing?
Oh, yes. We have that. Try one. That's a hot dog. It comes from Earth. Do you like it? There's no dog in this.
The first thing I want to know, actually, James, is had you ever seen this film before? Because as I was watching this, I almost felt like I was in hypnosis, uncovering memories of a past life, which never fully came to me. But I think I may have seen this when I was really young.
I had exactly the same feelings when I was
Really?
watching it. It must have been on TV when I was younger, because there were like moments I remembered so vividly.
Yeah,
but I was like,
what in particular?
I don't know. It was some of the alien creatures you meet in this film, and some of the actual space fights and stuff. Like, I remember the creatures which have the psychic link. I remember them really well. I don't think I've ever watched the whole of this film, but I think it's one which I've seen in bits several times.
I think I'm the same. For me, it was the first reveal of the ship, the design of the ship, Nell, and also the character of Nell, the AI on board, and the kind of like the face of Nell within the ship, and the kind of the banter between Nell and Shad. I was like, hold on a second. But I'm the same. I don't think I've seen the film. I can't have seen the film the whole way through, or if I did, I was really young, because none of it felt properly familiar. It was just these glimpses of memories. Yeah.
Why did the ship stick in your head? Is it anything to do with the design of the ship?
I mean, the design's great. Like, all of the ship designs in this are great. It's James Cameron. I know that there was some shifting of roles and responsibilities, but he did a lot of work on the production design. And watching this immediately after Starcrash, it's a noticeable step up in production design, and particularly the spaceships. I think the spaceships look actually very good in this, and rivaling Star Wars, at least in detail and craftsmanship. There's a lot of good miniatures at work.
Yeah, they've all got specifically styled spaceships for each of the characters, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
Because it makes them stand out and it makes them become more individual as they're flying off into space. But the reason I talk about Nell and Nell's design specifically is because there's lots of people have made the jokes that the ship looks like it's got boobs or it's a big ball sack.
Boobs or a ball sack, right?
Yeah, which is the crude thing, but I had to mention it because it's all over the internet, and I'm sure it's what the people want to hear.
I didn't think it looked like that because my mind is not in the gutter, James.
Yeah, mine is clearly in the gutter, especially after watching Starcrash before this.
Oh yeah, well, fair enough. Have you watched Farscape? Do you know the character of Rigel, the little puppet character? I thought the ship looked like Rigel because it's got the kind of like two sticky out bits at the top, like his eyebrows. Yeah. So that's what it reminded me of.
Because the ship sounds like it's alive. Like I'm thinking of something else. I'm thinking of Aquila for some reason.
Aquila? No, the ship's
that was
not
a
alive,
BBC TV show.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
No, the ship is alive in Farscape, but it doesn't talk. It's Maya. It's got a pilot called Pilot who talks for the ship.
Oh, Pilot's great. With all his arms, yeah. Yeah, I could see the Farscape sort of comparisons there.
There is a bit of Farscape in this movie, or rather, there's some Battle Beyond the Stars in Farscape, which came much later. But yeah, this is another Roger Corman movie. The other one was just distributed in America by Corman, I think. Starcrash. This one is actually a Roger Corman movie. He produced it. Apparently, did a bit of directing. He's quite involved in the actual directing of the movie as well, perhaps.
Yeah, he's listed as an uncredited director in this. The main director, of course, being Jimmy T. Murakami, who is more of a famous animator than he is director. Have you seen you've seen some of his animation work. Do you know what else he's animated?
Not off the top of my head. What's he known for?
He's done The Snowman.
Oh, wow, okay.
And When the Wind Blows, which you probably might recognise, yeah.
Oh, so like Raymond Briggs' books, he's brought to screen, okay.
Yeah, and I found that like just a really bizarre extra thing for him to have worked on. I don't know why. I'd never really thought that the guy who did The Snowman would end up on Battle Beyond the Stars, but here we are.
So I was kind of saying before that it feels like it had a little bit more time to stew. No, I actually thought this was quite good. I quite like this. And it doesn't quite feel as much of a rip-off of Star Wars.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. Not quite as much a rip-off of Star Wars as Starcrash is. What they've done is ripped off what Star Wars did, which is rip off an Akira Kurosawa movie, So George Lucas was heavily inspired by The Hidden Fortress. We didn't talk about that much last time. I mean, I've watched The Hidden Fortress, and I don't think it's that similar to Star Wars, but he's admitted that and acknowledged that reference point for Lucas. And this is the Seven Samurai. We've got a village, or a planet in this case, in need of defense. So we go out and we recruit 7 colourful characters who are mercenaries who are going to help us defend it and sacrifice themselves in a huge battle. And that just feels like a very smart move, because they've done what Star Wars did and then just made another space opera. So there's definite comparisons, but they're ripping it off in the right way, in the smart way, I think.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because it's kind of a remake of a remake, because I think this film has more in common with The Magnificent Seven because of its Western nature. And we've talked about horse operas inspiring space operas and all of the links that go with that. And this really feels like a Western in that way. I mean, it's even got one of the actors from The Magnificent Seven playing the same character, doing the same lines, and that's of course Robert Vaughn, who plays Gelt.
I love Robert Vaughn.
Yeah, he's great in this, but he is just playing the same character, doing the same stuff.
And I'm going to level with you, James. I'm absolutely fine with it. I love it.
Yeah,
you do it with samurais, do it with Western, do it with cowboys, do it in space. Like, why not? What a perfect genre trifecta of the same story framework. It's great fun.
Yeah, and it does work with this, doesn't it? Because it gives you an opportunity to explore that world and explore these characters and just go along for the adventure, because you know the formula. You know they need to find people to save their planet. So that's the adventure that our farm boy Shad is going to go on.
Yeah, and he's much more Luke Skywalker-y, isn't he? This sort of young, fairly naive, blonde farm boy who goes on this maturing experience of adventure. He's more in the Luke Skywalker mold than anyone in Starcrash.
And with Shad as well, the guy who plays Shad, Richard Thomas, when we talked about Lost in Space, we brought up the Waltons and that kind of like frontier lifestyle. I just found it really interesting because Richard Thomas was actually Johnny Boy in the Waltons.
Oh, okay.
Like a little tenuous link, like 7 degrees of separation for the films here. But I really enjoyed it when I found that out, because I was like, oh, the Waltons, another cowboy Western comparison to a space opera here.
Yeah. It's all it takes very much the same acting skills, doesn't it? Like if you've been a Walton, you're ready for space opera.
Yeah. And we even see one of the Robinsons in this as well. She's playing the cowboy's love interest in this. She was one of the Robinsons. The actress.
Is she the mother in the Robinsons?
No, she was the older daughter, I think.
Oh, okay. Oh God, yeah. I guess it's been a while since Lost in Space. Fair enough.
See all of the links in this film, but I think that's what makes it quite a joy to watch, all these little bits and pieces.
All those, yes. There's also some other things that I think elevate this film up a notch or two. We've already mentioned the craftsmanship of James Cameron's fingerprints on the film, which, especially in comparison to Starcrash, look very good, but also stand up well in the comparison to Star Wars, which is a valid and fair comparison. They don't fall apart and look crap, against the ILM work. We've also got James Horner on the soundtrack. James Horner again. We talked about how his soundtrack really elevates Krull when we talked about that, and it's just it's really amazing music that makes the fantasy really pop on screen. And again, it's right there in this, isn't it? It's just that another element of really high quality filmmaking craftsmanship behind the scenes that elevates everything else about the film that is a little bit derivative in the wake of Star Wars. But a couple of years later and, more effort going into it, it doesn't feel that like rushed out and just scattergun approach of Starcrash. It actually feels like talented people have come together to make a film in the mold of Star Wars, because that's what's popular and beloved in cinema and will sell tickets. But it's talented people putting effort into ripping it off, basically.
Yeah. And it's interesting coming back to composers again, because something I didn't mention when we talked about Starcrash, but John Barry did the soundtrack for Starcrash, who would later go on to do The Black Hole. So again, you've got composers which are becoming known for doing those epic soundtracks on space opera films. So it's good to see these composers going back to space opera as a canvas in order to make these really powerful soundtracks which really capture the imagination.
Yeah, I think it takes a certain kind of composer. And it's interesting that maybe some people keep coming back to the genre because they're good at it, I guess, and they can deliver the goods.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like this film kind of delivers the goods in quite a few ways as well. It's not the thing which I kind of was thinking about when I was watching this is, whereas Starcrash seems so schlocky and kind of almost doesn't take itself very seriously, at least that's kind of what it seems like on the surface. I don't know if this film takes itself a little bit too seriously at times, because obviously it's quite a serious plot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's ridiculous. So I don't know what your thoughts were about this. Was it too serious for a space opera? Would you have liked to have seen more comedy elements in it, or does it have enough of that to make it work?
I'm kind of already getting a bit burned out on comedy elements in space opera, so I didn't mind it. I can't argue with you. It certainly takes itself quite seriously. It's a little po-faced, but I didn't mind it. It actually really reminded me of Star Trek. It has a very Star Trek-y feel because at the centre of it, we've got this kind of peaceful community forced to act to defend itself, the Seven Samurai Magnificent Seven plot device. But it's almost this kind of utopian society. It feels like a kind of world that the Enterprise might encounter, but the Enterprise isn't coming to save the day. It has to look after itself, and that's how the plot develops. But that's what it reminded me of. And Star Trek tends to take itself quite seriously. There's not a huge amount of humour. It's quite a po-faced franchise. So, and I love Star Trek, so I quite like that about it. And I don't know, maybe because I watched Starcrash first, so I was ready for something to take itself a bit more seriously, and feel like I was sinking my teeth into a bit more serious sci-fi.
It does feel like it's that more serious side of things, doesn't it? And because if you've got to think about also what came out at the same time as Star Wars, we talked about 2001 coming out and Alien coming out, so it's kind of got a bit of both of that in terms of its tone slightly, but at the same time it is fantastical, and you've got these weird and wacky characters that this guy's meeting along the way. I mean, one of the first people he meets is a guy called Dr. Hephaestus.
Yeah.
Hephaestus, again, I think that was a lovely touch because Hephaestus was the blacksmith in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the names and stuff they've got in here kind of hark back to certain things. Like even the planet's called Planet Akir because it's a homage to Akira Kurosawa. Mm-hmm. So they've got like quite on the nose things like that. But the Dr. Hephaestus character, he's just like a head inside a little robot body, and he just wants Shad to procreate with his daughter. And it's just like weird stuff like that going on, which is quite fun for the start of the film. And it just kind of goes along that similar trajectory afterwards. Like all of the people they meet, there's something a little bit fun about everybody that he finds along the way.
But again, it's the highly episodic space opera format, isn't it? First, we go to the space station populated mainly by robots, and then we have an encounter with Space Cowboy, the Confederate flag-touting Earthling. Bit weird.
Yeah, he's got a little drinks dispenser in his belt, and yeah, he's an interesting character, played by George Peppard.
Yeah, and then the characters that you mentioned, are they called the Nestor, I think?
Nestor,
The colony, the kind of alien single consciousness colony. It's all about giving locations for the space opera to go through, and everything looks different, feels a bit different, and just makes it gives it that exciting pace that you expect from space opera storytelling.
Yeah, and you want to meet alien creatures along the way, and you want to meet all of these this eclectic cast of characters. And it's definitely eclectic, isn't it? You've got Gelt, who we talked about previously. We've got the lizard creature that we meet as well. Cayman, I think his name is. And then you've got the Valkyrie character played by Sybil Danning. It's got a bit of everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, a wild and wacky cast of colourful characters, much more so than Starcrash even, It feels more Barbarella-y. Very early Flash Gordon-y, the way Flash Gordon goes through that original serial, recruiting a merry band of warriors that we talked about to be his friends to overcome Ming. That's essentially what Shad does in this film. And I think some of it's genuinely memorable and well done and fun characters, and they all kind of end up sacrificing themselves at the end. So it has this kind of narrative weight, seriousness. It's taking itself seriously. It feels quite serious by the end of the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's quite brutal, that as well, isn't it? The fact that they all end up
Absolutely.
sacrificing themselves. But again, you get this amazing sort of dogfight in space, because you've got to have one of those in one of these space operas in the wake of Star Wars. It's got to be in there somewhere. So you've got all of that, and it just makes for an exciting part of the film. And again, just even the places that they go are so sort of stylized, because especially when you meet Gelt for the first time, it's just this abandoned kind of casino almost, isn't it? Or something like that, where it's like a den of thieves without any thieves because they've all left, and he just wants a warm meal and some company, doesn't he? Because he's outlawed from the entire universe.
Yeah, this kind of broody, desolate zone that he lives in all alone as this kind of terrifying but lonely badass. He's a fantastic character, and he gets a great ending as well to his character arc, with Shad burying him with the meal that he was promised. He's just great. It's so samurai western like.
It is, isn't it? And then, of course, you've got an evil emperor. We've got Sador, played by John Saxon in this, who, again, is another good evil emperor, in my opinion.
Yeah, again, it helps tie the film together in a similar way to Starcrash, but where in Starcrash everything's hung on how good Joe Spinell is, and he's tying it all together. In this case, John Saxon is actually just another element that's great, and there's a lot of great things. But John Saxon's not just this Emperor Ming type figure and chewing the scenery and having a lot of fun, but he's got this creepy, weird, unique facet to him about like replacing body parts. He's not just an evil emperor conquering for the sake of evil. He's also capturing his opponents and chopping off their arms because his arms like decay, or his whole body's decaying. So he's really gross and weird, and has even more evil motivation than just a stock evil emperor would do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of his character, isn't it? This idea of him prolonging his life by stealing different body parts from his foes as he defeats them. It makes him a bit more menacing. It gives him a different flavour to some of the other evil emperors we've seen. But yeah, I think that all in all, this film is quite cohesive. It knows what it's doing. Yeah. It's got a formula. Obviously, that formula has come from a different couple of films, but it kind of knows that, and it's just doing what it set out to do, which is Magnificent Seven Samurai in space.
Yeah, and I think it does a very good job of it. And I'd love to see a triple bill of this: Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, Battle Beyond the Stars. It should have 7 in the name. It should be like 7 spacemen or something. I don't know.
7 space. That'll be on the 7 stars.
Yeah.
Or some, I don't know. Well, yeah, something 7 would have been the icing on the cake for this.
Yeah.
But I think all of the cast have looked like they're having fun as well. Again, it's probably a similar experience for them as the guys which are working on Star Wars. Like, this film is mad. We don't really know what's going to go on. We don't know what's happening, but we're dressed up as funny characters and we're just having a laugh.
Yeah, I think so. But I think the difference might be that watching some of that behind the scenes stuff for Star Wars, they really genuinely weren't taking it seriously, and I thought it was very silly. Whereas you've got to wonder if Richard Thomas, for example, playing Shad, sure, he's having fun with it, but is he also thinking, yeah, but I might be the next Mark Hamill. This could be big. I'm about to be a real big star.
Yeah, I think they've got paychecks in their minds a little bit more in this one. especially coming out in 1980, those few years after Star Wars. So yeah, it's definitely in there, isn't it? You can see it in their performances. They're about that money.
But it's not meant to be. It doesn't set up for a sequel, but neither does the first Star Wars movie. But there's it's not to be the franchise that Star Wars is, of course.
Yeah, it doesn't have that longevity that Star Wars had. But again, it's got a bit of a following behind it. There are people which remember when this film came out. It came out at sort of the right time for people wanting a kind of Star Wars-esque film before the next Star Wars comes out. Do you think that this change that we're seeing in sci-fi around this sort of like late 70s, 80s time, is space opera making sci-fi more of a... Is it making a mockery of science fiction at this point, do you think? Because we've looked at a few films which are like... I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because space opera is such a fantastical genre to go into, and it's so different from a lot of other science fiction because of how much fun it has. But do you think this affected people's perception of what sci-fi is around about this period of time?
I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe. I mean, there's certain expectations that then dictate market forces, aren't there? And that's why we get films like Starcrash and Battle Beyond the Stars. But if you just judged it on Starcrash, I'd be like, yeah, like it's, Star Wars has had a negative effect, but that's obviously not the case. And Battle Beyond the Stars, I think, is a genuinely worthwhile film for even though it is derivative of Star Wars, and that's fine, and everything's going to be, or a lot of stuff is going to be for a few years because it's the biggest movie of all time. That's fine. I don't think that space opera is having a negative effect, and there's also plenty of, there's fantastic sci-fi coming out across the late 70s and early 80s. There's no real shortage, but I guess what's difficult is that we're looking back on that from decades into the future. So I'm only aware of the good sci-fi from those decades, and maybe if you were a big sci-fi fan, if you were particularly a Star Trek fan in the wake of Star Wars, you might be a little bit wound up by the less cerebral approach to storytelling and the more kind of fantastical stuff. But I don't know. I think it's fine. Good stuff can happen in the wake of Star Wars, and I think Battle Beyond the Stars is an example of that. And bad stuff will happen in the wake of Star Wars, and that's Starcrash.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of this kind of thing as the series progresses, and it's going to be interesting as we go further into the 80s later on and seeing sort of what changes in space opera, and is it as cohesive as something like Battle Beyond the Stars, or does it lose its way in the same way that Starcrash did? So that's going to be an interesting thing to look at as we carry on our journey through sci-fi. But next week, we're taking another journey. This time, we're returning to the world of anime. Yes, I'm excited.
And we're looking at some pretty old anime, right? Some classic space opera anime from the 70s and 80s.
Yes, we're looking at a couple of anime series which are quite renowned. We're looking at Space Battleship Yamato, which was out in 1974. So we're going to be looking at the original version of that. And we're also going to be taking a look at Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which I've heard lots of recommendations from a lot of Matt's friends. I'll be interested to delve into that one next time on the show.
Me too. I've always wanted to see Legend of Galactic Heroes. It's kind of a real touchstone of sci-fi anime that I just haven't had the time to get into because it's also kind of a monster. But yeah, it'd be fun to dive into those. So join us for that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, please do. In the meantime, I'm going to get stuck into these anime series because we've got a few episodes to watch, haven't we, Matt?
Yeah, I sense a few things being watched at double speed.
We'll see you next time, listeners.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Journey Through Sci-Fi.
You can find us at journeythroughsci-fi.com, where you can find links to our social media and join the conversation.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard and want to support us, why not leave us a review on your podcast app of choice? It really helps new people find the show.
You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi, where you can receive exclusive bonus episodes every month.
Don't forget to subscribe to the show, and we'll see you again next time for another Journey Through Sci-Fi.
you.